presentation, I guess, is going to involve, is it Megan Klein? Clem, excuse me. Megan Klein. And going to be talking to us about the benefits of a historic district or historic districts.
Hi, Megan.
Hello everyone, I'll try to keep this fairly short and simple for you because I know you have other things on the agenda.
Just tap the,
You're getting picked up. Yeah, you're
Okay. Just to introduce myself, my name is Megan Klein. I am the Director of Preservation Services at the Landmark Society of Western New York. We're a regional historic preservation nonprofit organization. We work in 9 counties, but we're based in Rochester. And part of what we do is go around to communities and help them with National Register nominations, which I know we were contacted by members of the Historic Commission to come and talk with them about what that is and what that might mean for the village, and now here we are bringing it to the village board. So I would say a National Register of Historic Places is a listing of our historic buildings and sites and objects throughout the nation that are significant to American history, archaeology, architecture, all sorts of things. However, as the Historical Commission discovered with us, we did start talks with the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, SHPO for short. They are the ones that oversee this program. And in talking with them, because there's never been a historic resource survey done here in the village of Webster, they said that that would be the starting point. So, rewinding a little bit, the first step would be a historic resource survey. What that is it's a survey. We could look at doing it in the village, we can look at the town in the village, however this works out if you should decide to move forward with something like this. And what it does is you would work with a preservation consultant, whether that's the Landmark Society or someone else that we can lead you to do a boots on the ground survey and inventory of all the historic properties. And since we're in the village, we'd be looking at the village boundary and going through and basically, as I mentioned, it's an inventory of all the historic properties within the village. It can be buildings, it can be objects, so if there's monuments that have been here that are historically significant, those can be considered as well. And in this survey, the purpose is to identify individual properties that may be eligible on their own for the National Register listing, or to define and identify boundaries of a historic district, which would be all-encompassing of potentially residential and commercial sections of the village. And this survey is, as I mentioned, the first step towards a National Register nomination. So the reason the state requires this as a first step is just so that it's basically their determination of eligibility, because before you can start a National Register nomination, the state has to determine that there is an eligible district there. So basically, you don't want to start a nomination, get all the way down the road with all of that work being done, just to have the state or the National Park Service ultimately tell you that you don't have an eligible district. To be honest, here in the village of Webster, you have an eligible district. To the extent of what the boundary is, that's the purpose of the survey. So that's kind of where you would start. And then from there, the next step after the survey is completed is to then move on to a National Register nomination for a historic district here in the village. I know often funding comes up with how do you pay for these types of projects. So there are grants available to municipalities that they can use in order to pay for these things to be done. The main one that a lot of municipalities that we work with use is called the Preserve New York Grant. It's a grant through the Preservation League of New York State. They are a statewide nonprofit organization, so like the Landmark Society, but they work on a statewide level. And these grants help fund up to 80% of the cost of a project. There is a 20% match with it. There are other grant programs out there that you can apply for to help with that match as well. And that's something that we at the Landmark Society, whether we are your consultant working with you through this project, should you decide to move forward or not, we can help connect you with potential funding opportunities, help you with applications for those grants, etc., all of that. So we're also here just as a resource as well. And so the purpose and benefit of having the historic resource survey is, number one, the village can use it as a planning tool when you're looking at development opportunities or just looking at an inventory of what you have and what other things that can be done with some of your historic buildings. Again, it's also to identify those historic district potential boundaries for the state, because this would be a document that would be submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office. And it would also document individually all of the buildings that would be within that historic district to a surface level. It's not in-depth. And it also ends in a report that has a historic context statement as well, which is a fairly lengthy in-depth search into the history and development of the village of Webster. So it's a pretty interesting and unique document that you would have that can also be used just to help with community pride and awareness and where you've come from. Sometimes people just don't know until you have it set in front of you, which is a really great document. And then the National Register, of course, takes that survey a step further in a much deeper, in-depth, very comprehensive history of the village of Webster, and you basically would list that district under whatever the different areas of significance that it falls under. So for example, it would probably be community planning and development and architecture. And so you really dive into the development of the village itself, how the roads were laid, when different properties were constructed, how did your commercial section come about, and that sort of thing. And the ultimate purpose of having either of these things done and getting a National Register Historic District is that, first and foremost, a National Register Historic District, buildings listed in the National Register, this is an honorary designation. There's a very big misconception that if you're listed in the National Register, the state or federal government can tell you what you can and can't do with your property. That is not true unless there's state or federal funding or permitting involved in a project. So, you know, if someone wanted to paint their house bright pink with yellow polka dots, so long as it's allowed under local code, they certainly could do that. The National Register listing would not stop that. It also doesn't add protections to buildings, so buildings listed in the National Register can be demolished. But I think it's very important for all of you and the public to understand if this was something you move forward with, there are no restrictions to private property owners being listed in the National Register. The ultimate purpose is that you would then, homeowners in the district and commercial property owners in the district would become eligible for the state and federal tax credit programs. So New York State has a historic homeownership tax credit program. It's worth 20% of your eligible rehabilitation expenses. That's for anything from repair to rehabilitation. It includes roof work, painting, interior and exterior work, pretty much everything but your furniture, your decor, and your tools. Can be eligible for this. So that's a really great tool for your residents, your property owners, to be able to maintain their homes. We all know that there are great expenses that come along with owning any home, but especially a historic property. And then on the commercial side, there's both a state program and a federal program that provide the same thing again, a 20% tax credit on eligible expenses for rehabilitation. So let's say you have an empty commercial building along Main Street. The owner of that building could use the tax credit program to rehab that building and bring it back to life. And again, that puts it back on the tax books. It puts it back into community use. So there are a lot of benefits for being listed, not just so that people understand and have pride in their the history of their community, but also these tax credits that become available. And also being listed in the National Register can open up other grant funding opportunities, generally not for homeowners, unfortunately, but for a lot of nonprofits, municipalities. There are other funding opportunities that the door is open to once you are listed in the National Register. So that's really the biggest bonus about doing something like this, is really having that tax credit available to the community. So I don't know if there are any questions. I know that was fairly quick, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, hey, thanks for coming. That's transit bank of it. And there's an overlay district in Penfield. It says historic overlay. Oops. Is it something like what you're talking about?
No, so what you're talking about in Penfield, that's a local designation.
Yeah.
And I actually sit on the Penfield Preservation Board. So that local designation, and it's something that I think you don't have here in Webster now, correct? There's no local, it's something you could do.
Yeah.
On a local level, that overlay typically does come with a level of protection to properties, so there would potentially be a historic preservation board that would oversee usually just exterior
Yeah.
work. But no, so it'd be completely separate. So what Penfield has, that's a local designation
Okay.
versus the National Register, which does not have, it doesn't have any review purview, again, unless there's state or federal funding. So, for example, the tax credit programs I just mentioned would have to be reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office. But for the most part, if you're painting your house or replacing your roof or doing needed maintenance work, it's all approvable. Same thing with, let's say you just want to remodel your bathroom or kitchen, that's also eligible. So it's just a good resource, I think.
Do you have a ballpark as to how much these surveys cost?
That's a great question. Working on them, I'm going to very much so ballpark, but for the size of the village of Webster, it could be anywhere from, I'm going to ballpark it around 20 to 25,000. And again, there are grants available to help with that.
The village has an existing survey of historic properties.
Yes,
I know
92
that's-
survey.
That's seen, yeah. That has different properties listed, so I don't know when it was completed.
1992?
92.
But it
I think it was
doesn't-
1992, it's coming to me right now.
Yeah, it doesn't include like a lot of the business
It
districts.
does, okay. I know I've seen it, and that's why I was just thinking when we were talking about it.
Right, and I think that that's a great start. The only reason that that one is sort of out of consideration for moving towards the National Register nomination is that that survey was done more locally, so it was never reviewed by the state. And that's the main thing, is that the review and the survey has to be done through the state. So it's all inventory forms for all the buildings are filled out, and this all gets done on the state's cultural resource information system. And so that's the main reason, the difference between these is that that wasn't surveyed through the state of New York. And now, because it's 30 plus years old, they wouldn't be able to use that to make a determination of eligibility for a historic district off of, because of changes that likely happened during that time.
Yeah.
So Megan, you said you have an eligible district. Why did you say that? Or what leads you to believe that?
Well, just driving around the village, I think there's a very large portion of your residential area here that would absolutely be eligible to be a historic district. I also think that you have portions of your commercial district which would be eligible. It's just a matter of, kind of the purpose of the survey is to really go through and look individually at the properties from an exterior standpoint and really determining what is the boundary of a potential district. So for example, can the commercial buildings that are eligible and historic, are they connected in a cohesive manner to the residential section, or would it be two separate districts? And that's sort of what we're looking at. Are there streets more towards the peripheral that maybe have been more altered than others that wouldn't be included in a historic district? And that's not to say that changes can't happen to properties. They can, and they're still eligible for National Register listing in a historic district. But yeah, that's the main thing is driving around. That's part of what I do in my daily job, is to drive around and make initial determinations on whether or not there's eligible districts. Then it's my job to make that argument in a historic resource survey that then the state reviews.
I like it.
Yeah, thank you. My only question you answered, Mike, I don't want anyone or any business to be locked into something and couldn't make changes. You said that is not the case under this,
Right.
so that's important.
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, people are free to make whatever changes they want. I always say within the realm of what local code and what the building code allows, because just because there's no review with the National Register, it doesn't mean you're excluded from having to follow local code.
Megan, this would be, the 92 one, this would be a little different presentation. I mean, because it sounded to me like when you talked to us, the new surveys are just, they look different, they're a little more comprehensive, they have a different tone to them.
Yes, so the survey that was done back in 1992 They're a little more comprehensive now when you're going through the state, there's a little more information. So basically, every property that is surveyed would get an inventory form, and all of those get their address put down there, you know, would they be contributing or non-contributing to the historic district? They get an approximate construction date written down, and then a building description and a brief statement of significance for every property, which isn't something that used to be done with the surveys, so they were a little less comprehensive.
Yeah.
How long does it take if the village wanted to apply for grants? Give them a time, you know, like how many months does it take?
Right. Yes, so for the Preserve New York grant that I mentioned, that's the major one that most municipalities apply for, again, through the Preservation League of New York State. Applications for that grant are due every year by the end of March, and they make their announcement, of course, it takes forever, they make their announcement typically sometime in August about who's being funded. And then from there, from start to finish, doing a historic resource survey, and then also, I would say, same kind of timeline for a National Register nomination is about a year from start to finish. Well, thank you, and if you
Yeah,
have
thank you.
any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that information.